Everyone tells you to be nice, be agreeable, be easy to work with. And for years, maybe you were. Until one day, you realized something brutal. The nicer you were, the more invisible you became. You were passed over, stepped on, taken for granted. But what if I told you that Machiavelli warned you about this centuries ago? That your kindness, without strategy, is a weakness predators can smell? Because the moment you stop being nice, really stop, is the moment the world stops mistaking you for prey. They called it kindness, but it felt more like self-erasure. You smiled when you were insulted, nodded when you wanted to scream, made yourself smaller, quieter, easier, because you were taught that nice was the safest mask to wear. But Machiavelli would have stared through that mask and told you a dark truth. In a world ruled by power and perception, niceness is a currency that depreciates the more you spend it. He knew what most people are too afraid to admit, that the world doesn't reward your kindness. It punishes your predictability. When you are always nice, people learn you can be bent, delayed, controlled. They assign you the role of emotional servant and expect you to thank them for the privilege. Worse, you start believing that if you're just nicer, they'll change. But they don't. They sharpen their blades on your silence. And you start fading. Machiavelli's world was brutal kings, wars, betrayal, but ours is no less vicious. The difference is, the cruelty today is dressed in politeness. You're overlooked at work because you didn't self-promote. You're ghosted by friends because you never said no. You're called sweet while being passed over for people who speak less but demand more. And the worst part, you thought it was your fault. You thought you weren't nice enough. But Machiavelli knew better. He didn't worship virtue, he dissected it. And he warned, excessive kindness is not a virtue, it's a trap. A ruler who is too kind becomes a puppet. A servant who is too kind becomes invisible. The mask of niceness, once worn too long, becomes your real face, and by then, it's too late. So the question isn't, should I stop being nice? The real question is, what happens when I finally do? The answer is not what you've been told. It's colder, sharper, liberating. Because when you stop being nice, the world doesn't collapse, it reshapes around you. And those who once fed on your silence suddenly choke on your absence. Welcome to the turning point. You're not cruel, you're not rude, but you're done performing softness for people who only respect sharpness. And now, finally, you're not nice, you're dangerous, just as Machiavelli would have wanted. Being nice feels like safety. It feels like belonging, like maybe if you smile enough, bend enough, give enough, you'll finally be seen as worthy. That's the lie buried in the bones of people-pleasing. The quiet hope that self-sacrifice will be rewarded with love, protection, and peace. But Machiavelli would have told you the truth. No one else dared to say. The person who pleases everyone becomes useful to no one. People-pleasing is not virtue. It is fear in costume. And that fear doesn't make you safer, it makes you easier to use. You learned early that rejection feels like death. A frown from your parent, a sigh from your teacher, silence from someone you admired. They taught you that approval was survival. So you adapted. You learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to mirror the emotions of others, to bite your tongue even when the truth ached in your jaw. You became soft, agreeable, selfless, and it worked for a while. You were liked, but you were never respected. People praised your good heart, but still left you waiting. They said you were easy to talk to, but never really listened. They told you they admired your patience, your compassion, but not once did they fear losing you. That's the problem. People-pleasing doesn't teach them how to value you. It teaches them how far you're willing to go without being asked. And over time, it corrodes you. You start saying yes when you want to scream no. You offer help even when you're drowning. You become fluent in silence, allergic to confrontation, terrified of the word selfish. But what Machiavelli knew, and what they never told you, is that power begins where approval ends. The moment you stop needing their acceptance is the moment they start wondering where your limit is. He would have called your constant niceness a liability, because predictable behavior is controllable behavior. And someone who cannot bear to disappoint is someone who will always be bent. That's why people pleasers often attract manipulators. They know you'll explain yourself, justify yourself, apologize for having needs. They sense it, the hunger to be liked, the fear of being disliked. But what happens when that hunger dies? When the approval no longer tastes sweet? When you realize that your dignity cannot be built on borrowed affection, you stop chasing, and they start noticing. Noticing that you speak less, but mean more, that you show up less, but matter more, that your silence is no longer fear, it's a boundary. This is the death of people-pleasing, and the birth of power. Not through cruelty, but through refusal. The refusal to be soft where steel is required. Machiavelli didn't ask you to be heartless. He asked you to be unafraid. And there is nothing more frightening to the world than someone who no longer needs its applause. When you're nice, people know what you'll do before you do it. They know you'll say yes. They know you'll back down. They know you'll forgive, absorb, adjust. And that is the beginning of your undoing. Machiavelli understood something most people still refuse to face. That predictability is not peace, it is vulnerability. The more people can anticipate your behavior, the easier it is to shape it, corner it, weaponize it against you. Niceness is not a shield. It is a script. And once they've read it enough times, they know exactly where to press. They know how to make you flinch, how to make you fold. You are no longer a person, you are a pattern, and patterns don't scare anyone. Think about how often you've said yes just to avoid awkwardness. How many times you've smiled through disrespect just to keep things nice. How often you've apologized for simply existing with needs, opinions, boundaries. Every time you did, someone somewhere took a mental note. This is how far you'll go. This is how much you'll take. This is how little it takes to control you. And the more consistent you are in your niceness, the less value your yes holds. If you always agree, your agreement means nothing. If you always forgive, your forgiveness becomes expected. You become a tool, not a threat. And Machiavelli knew only those who are capable of punishment are capable of mercy. The rest are just weak. That's the danger of being nice without limit. You make yourself easy to read, easy to use, and eventually easy to replace. People will take from you without guilt because they've convinced themselves you're fine. You always are, aren't you? You always say it's okay. You always smile and say it doesn't bother you. Until one day you stop. You stop answering right away. You stop agreeing out of habit. You stop showing up out of guilt. And suddenly, people are confused. They ask if something's wrong. They accuse you of changing. They act as if you are the one being unreasonable. But the truth is, they've grown addicted to your predictability. And withdrawal feels like betrayal. Machiavelli would have called this a necessary shock. He believed unpredictability was power, the ability to disrupt expectations, to make others unsure of your next move, because uncertainty forces respect. When people don't know how far you'll go, they step more carefully. When they're not sure if you'll stay silent or speak, forgive or vanish, they don't play games. They hesitate, and in that hesitation, you reclaim your position, not as the nice one, but as the unknown. And in the realm of strategy, the unknown is always feared more than the known. So stop being predictable. Stop being safe. Stop rehearsing the script they handed you. Rewrite it. Because once they realize you're no longer who they assumed you become, someone they cannot control, you think being liked is a reward. You think if you just do enough, give enough, prove enough, the world will offer you a seat at the table. But the truth, Machiavelli understood, and most people never will, is that the pursuit of being liked is the fastest way to be used. When you chase approval, you're handing the steering wheel of your life to someone else, and they'll drive you straight into exhaustion if it benefits them. Every time you smile when you're tired, say yes when you want to say no, stay when you want to leave, you are paying a price. Not in money, in energy, in dignity, in time you will never get back. You become the person everyone calls when they need something, but no one checks on when you're gone. You become the one who's praised for being so sweet, so supportive, so easy to be around. But notice it's never so respected, because people don't respect what's always available. They consume it, then they move on. Machiavelli believed it was far safer to be feared than loved if you had to choose. Not because fear is better, but because love fades and fear forces memory. In modern terms, that means being respected, not just liked. And you cannot be respected by those who see you as soft clay they can shape at will. The world will not warn you when you're being drained. It will applaud you. Applaud your generosity, your humility, your constant availability. They will hand you empty praise like it's currency and pretend it's compensation. But your soul knows better. It knows when your yes is really a cry for worth. It knows when your silence is survival, not serenity. And slowly, your body begins to revolt. Burnout, resentment, emotional numbness. That's the price of being liked. It's not free. It never was. And the worst part? The ones you gave the most to will be the first to leave when you finally say no. That's how conditional their affection was. Machiavelli saw this pattern in rulers who tried to win love through gifts, peace, leniency. They weren't honored. They were assassinated. Because no one protects the overly generous, they just take until there's nothing left. You were not born to be everyone's comfort, object. You were not born to be the cushion people collapse onto. You were born to be whole. And sometimes, wholeness requires distance, requires limits, requires silence. So if you feel like your niceness has become a prison, it's because it has. A gilded one, but a cage all the same. And the key isn't found in being nicer. It's found in walking away, quietly, without guilt. Let them feel the absence. Let them miss the ease. Let them wonder where the soft version of you went, and never explain it. Because what you lose in approval, you gain in power. Just as Machiavelli would have told you, cruelty has a bad reputation because weak people misunderstand it. They think cruelty means chaos, violence, rage. But to Machiavelli, cruelty was never random. It was a tool, a controlled fire, a way to establish order when kindness would only invite rebellion. He wrote that cruelty, if well used, can prevent greater harm. Not cruelty for pleasure, but cruelty for clarity. There is a difference. The world will never admit this to you, but soft words do not always save people. Sometimes they sedate them. Sometimes the gentle approach only delays the explosion. Because not all problems are solved with warmth. Some require cold precision. Some require saying no with steel in your voice. Some require walking away and not turning back. You call that cruel, but is it? Or is it protection wearing a sharper face? You were taught to avoid being harsh at all costs, to soften every truth, to make your boundaries palatable, to say maybe later when what you meant was never. But that isn't kindness. That's fear pretending to be politeness. And Machiavelli would have warned you mercy at the wrong moment is betrayal. Betrayal of yourself, of the people, depending on your strength, of the peace that only comes after hard lines are drawn. Look at your life. How many times have you delayed the necessary because you didn't want to seem mean? How often have you tolerated the intolerable because you feared the discomfort of confrontation? That is not virtue, that is rot, and it spreads. It tells others that they can keep crossing lines because you'll move them every time. But the ruler who wants peace must sometimes choose war. The person who wants respect must sometimes risk being disliked. Cruelty, when used with control, does something kindness cannot. It makes people pause. It wakes them up. It makes them reconsider their next move, because kindness is expected, niceness is assumed, but severity, that leaves a mark, that carves memory, that rewrites behavior. And the cruelest thing you can do truly is to let someone continue harming you because you are too afraid to stop them. That is how cycles repeat. That is how good people disappear while pretending to be good enough. So stop avoiding the edge of your voice. Stop apologizing for your standards. Stop softening your no until it sounds like maybe you do not need to become a monster. But you do need to understand the monsters you deal with. And monsters do not respond to sweetness. They respond to force. Measured, strategic, unapologetic force. Machiavelli would say this: if cruelty ends the confusion, then cruelty is mercy. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to stop being kind. The moment you stop being nice, people do not applaud. They panic because they were never in love with you. They were in love with your compliance, your softness, your silence. And now that you've changed, they feel betrayed not because you hurt them, but because you stopped letting them hurt you. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He saw how a shift in power always provoked a reaction. The minute a servant stops bowing, the master feels disrespected, not because the servant attacked, but because they stood tall. You have been performing politeness for so long that the moment you stop, people feel exposed. You are no longer mirroring their emotions. You are no longer cushioning their guilt. You are no longer making excuses for their bad behavior. And that silence, that stillness becomes terrifying to them. They ask, "What's wrong with you?" But what they really mean is, "Why are you no longer controllable?" You see, niceness was never a neutral trait. It was a social currency. You gave it freely, hoping it would buy you peace, affection, loyalty, and it did briefly. But now that you've withdrawn it, their true dependency is revealed. You weren't just nice, you were convenient, predictable, easy to manage, and your absence, your refusal, your new stillness, it destabilizes everything they built around you. Machiavelli would say, power is tested not when you give, but when you withhold, when you no longer fill the gaps in the room, when you stop cleaning up the emotional messes, when you don't return the call, when you say, plainly, no, and suddenly the people who once praised you for being so easygoing now say you've changed, as if evolution is betrayal, as if boundaries are violence. But here's the truth: people only call you difficult when you stop making life easier for them. And their panic is not your burden to carry. Let them squirm. Let them wonder. Let them throw words like cold or heartless or arrogant. It's all noise, a distraction. What they're really saying is, I don't know how to operate around this version of you. The one I cannot predict, the one I cannot guilt. And good, that's the goal. To disrupt the roles they cast you in. To destroy the version of you they built for their comfort. To reclaim your voice, even if it means they walk away. Machiavelli would remind you, transformation is always met with resistance, especially from those who benefited from your former self. So when they panic, let them. When they accuse, do not explain. When they press, do not perform. Because the ones who truly valued you never needed you to shrink to be lovable, and the ones who did, they were never worthy of your niceness to begin with. There is a word more powerful than any apology, any explanation, any carefully constructed justification. That word is no, not shouted, not defended, just delivered, clean and sharp. Machiavelli would call it a strategic weapon, one that requires neither violence nor emotion, only timing. Because the word no, when spoken by someone who used to say yes, hits harder than any speech, it is not cruelty, it is not coldness, it is clarity. You were taught to make your refusals soft, to wrap them in 1,000 reasons, to pause, explain, smile, cushion, because heaven forbid someone thinks you are rude. But here's what no one told you: the longer you avoid the word no, the more your yes becomes worthless. Every time you say yes out of guilt, you train the world to ignore your discomfort. Every time you say yes to keep the peace, you trade your peace for someone else's convenience, and the world will not thank you for it. It will just keep asking, keep taking, keep expecting, until you finally say no, and everything changes. You will be accused of being difficult, selfish, ungrateful. That's part of the design. Because people who benefit from your yes are not prepared for your no. It unsettles them. It forces them to consider your boundaries, your priorities, your autonomy, things they were never required to think about before. But Machiavelli knew that a ruler is not defined by their generosity. They are defined by what they refuse, what they deny, what they hold sacred. And when you say no, you draw a line that cannot be crossed without consequence. It is not a wall, but a gate. It says, you may approach, but only with respect. The truth is, no is not a rejection of others. It is a recognition of yourself, of your limits, your values, your time. And the moment you begin to say it without apology, you become unreadable, uncontrollable. That's when they start taking you seriously. Because kindness is often seen as compliance, and boundaries are seen as rebellion. But rebellion, in the right context, is sanity. You do not owe anyone access to your life, your energy, your peace, simply because you've given it before. No is your reset button. It is the sound of you remembering who you are, and those who cannot respect it never respected you in the first place. Machiavelli would say that power belongs to those who can deny without flinching, who can disappoint without guilt, who can walk away without explanation. So speak it. Say no, not with anger, not with fear, with certainty. Because the moment you do, the world reshapes itself around your new silence and the echo it leaves behind. Respect does not come from being liked. It comes from being understood, not emotionally, but structurally. People respect what they cannot easily access, what they cannot manipulate, what they cannot predict. And the most respected people are not the loudest, the warmest, or the most generous. They are the ones with boundaries so clear they do not need to raise their voices. Machiavelli would tell you that love makes people complacent, but fear makes them alert. And in the language of power, boundaries are fear in disguise. Not terror, but caution. Boundaries make others calculate. They make others pause before acting. That pause is where your power lives. Niceness, on the other hand, does not create caution. It creates entitlement. When you are always available, always flexible, always saying yes, you become part of the background. A comfort, a guarantee. And no one respects a guarantee. They rely on it. They expect it. They take it for granted. But they do not fear losing it. And what people do not fear losing, they do not value. So the next time someone calls you cold for creating space, remember this. Warmth without a spine invites frostbite. You are not cruel for setting limits. You are not rude for refusing access. You are not broken because your kindness now comes with terms. You are simply done being a doormat with a smile. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are doors that require knocking. And Machiavelli knew that the strongest leaders are not the ones who say yes the most. They are the ones who know exactly when and to whom to say no. You teach people how to treat you not through words, but through consequences. Not through reminders, but through action. The first time someone crosses your boundary and you let it slide, you teach them that your no is negotiable. The second time, you confirm it. But the moment you enforce it calmly, firmly, without apology, everything changes. You become unreadable. Not because you are hiding, but because you are no longer reacting. And that unreadability becomes respect. Machiavelli would have admired someone who does not explain their limits, only enforces them. Someone who understands that being feared is not always about aggression. Sometimes it is about control. Control over your time, your emotions, your space. So let them call you difficult. Let them say you've changed. Let them walk away. You are not here to be understood by those who only valued your absence of resistance. You are here to be respected. And that begins the moment you stop needing to be liked. Because once your boundaries are known, your presence becomes a privilege. And privileges, unlike people pleasers, are never taken lightly. There comes a moment when you realize that being liked has cost you more than it ever gave you. That your constant explanations, your rehearsed smiles, your desperate need to be understood have all turned you into something breakable, predictable, easily swayed. And that is when the shift begins. You stop trying to be the favorite. You stop proving your intentions. You stop justifying your decisions. You start becoming something far more dangerous, unreadable. Machiavelli would have called this your evolution from subject to strategist, because when people cannot read you, they cannot prepare for you. And when they cannot prepare for you, they fear you, not because you've become cruel, but because you've become uncertain, controlled, calculated, a mystery. You used to hand people your emotions like invitations. They always knew how to make you react. One sigh and you'd apologize. One frown and you'd fold. But not anymore. Now your silence says more than your words. Now your absence stings more than your presence ever did. You no longer flinch at distance. You no longer rush to explain. You understand that mystery is power, and power is silence mastered. People don't know if you're angry or bored, if you're done or observing, if you're gone for good or just unbothered. That uncertainty drives them mad, and in that madness, they begin to respect you. Because nothing is more intimidating than someone who does not crave your approval. The new version of you does not chase closure. You do not perform vulnerability to win connection. You do not soften your edges just to be accepted. You remain composed, distant, polite, but unreadable. and the people who once held power over you begin to tremble in your stillness. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good when necessary. You now understand what he meant. You are not here to be good. You are here to be untouchable, and untouchable people are never easy to define. That's the point. You do not broadcast your plans. You do not seek validation. You let your absence explain everything your presence used to over-explain. And they will talk. They will say you're cold, arrogant, even cruel. Let them. They're speaking to the version of you that used to explain herself to exhaustion. That version is gone. Now, you are not heartless. You are strategic. You are not distant. You are in control. You are not confusing. You are protecting your peace. And the longer you stay unreadable, the clearer your value becomes, because only rare things are kept in silence. And only powerful people are feared for what they might do, not what they already have. Machiavelli would not just approve, he would recognize you as his favorite kind of player. Quiet, observant, and always 3 moves ahead. There is a coldness that does not come from hate, but from clarity. A calm detachment that unsettles people more than shouting ever could. This is not bitterness. This is not cruelty for cruelty's sake. This is what Machiavelli would call strategic coldness, the discipline to act without emotion when emotion would ruin everything. You've been told to lead with your heart, to forgive easily, to understand always. And for a while, you tried. You gave people the benefit of the doubt. You assumed the best. You responded with warmth, even when they came with knives. But the more you did, the more you realized they were not grateful. They were emboldened. Your warmth became an opening. Your empathy became a lever. And every time you tried to fix the damage with kindness, they learned that you could be broken with ease. That's where strategic coldness begins, in the moment you stop bleeding for people who sharpened their blades on your back. This is not about revenge. It is about removing your feelings from the chessboard. No more reacting, no more pleading, no more emotional performances that make them feel powerful. Just distance, just silence, just observation. When they insult you, you don't flinch. When they guilt you, you don't argue. When they bait you, you don't bite. You remain still, calculated, detached. And that unnerves them, because most people are used to getting a reaction. Most people only feel important when they know they've gotten under your skin. But now, they don't know anything. They cannot measure their power. And without that measurement, they crumble. Machiavelli would say, this is how real dominance is built, not through violence, but through restraint, not through rage, but through silence. A prince who lashes out too quickly loses control, but a prince who waits, watches, and chooses his moment, that is a ruler others fear to cross. Strategic coldness doesn't mean you never feel. It means you never let those feelings make your decisions. You protect your throne, not your pride. You protect your future, not your ego. So when someone disrespects you, you don't chase closure. You don't explain your worth. You don't fight to be seen. You vanish. You remove the reward of your attention, your presence, your softness, and in that absence, they begin to understand. They feel the temperature drop, and they finally realize what they were dealing with. Not a pushover, not a weak heart, but a mind that sees the board from above, a mind that knows the cost of every move. Strategic coldness is not about being cruel. It's about staying in power long enough to never need cruelty. And once you master it, you'll never be outplayed again. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who no longer flinches, someone who does not explain, does not beg, does not react. You used to be soft in every direction, bending to keep the peace, explaining to soothe guilt, overgiving to prove you were worth staying for. But now you are still. And they hate it. Machiavelli understood that true power lies in composure, not in rage, not in retaliation, but in the calm that follows when you've burned every bridge that led to your own self-abandonment. They do not envy your kindness. They envied your predictability, your responsiveness, your emotional accessibility. You were the person who always replied, always showed up, always forgave. They knew what buttons to press. They knew how to provoke, how to guilt, how to extract your energy. But not anymore. Something changed. You didn't announce it. You didn't threaten it. You simply stopped dancing for their drama. You stopped explaining your silence. You stopped handing them pieces of yourself in the hope that one day they'd see the whole. You stopped being moved by manipulation. And in that stillness, in that new indifference, they began to unravel. Because the worst punishment is not cruelty, it is indifference. It is watching someone who once worshipped your chaos now stand back with folded arms, no anger, no tears. Just a closed door and a quiet that stretches longer than they ever imagined. This is what Machiavelli would call unbothered authority, a kind of quiet strength that makes people respect you precisely because they cannot access you. You are no longer on call, no longer predictable, no longer emotionally available to people who weaponized your warmth. And that, more than anything, is what they cannot stand. Because now they cannot measure their importance. They cannot find their reflection in your reaction. You have stolen their favorite mirror, the one where their cruelty looked like power, because you kept responding. And without it, they are forced to face the hollowness of their behavior. You were never the weak one. You were just too loyal to your old self, the version of you that kept hoping things would change if you were just a little nicer. But now, you've become dangerous in the best way. You don't raise your voice, you don't chase, you don't defend, you disappear. And in that absence, they see what they lost. Not a servant, not a pleaser, but a presence. A steady, unbothered presence that no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. Machiavelli would have called it mastery, the moment when your silence does more damage than your words ever could. And that is when they envy you most. Not for your charm, not for your strength, but for your peace. Because the one thing they will never own is a mind they can no longer disturb. You were raised to believe that your value came from what you could give: time, attention, support, love. You believed that if you gave enough, people would stay. That if you made yourself useful, you would be safe. But Machiavelli would have told you the opposite. He would have warned that when you give without limit, you are not seen as generous, you are seen as owned. The truth is, most people do not know how to handle someone who offers value without obedience. They are used to love that comes with strings, kindness that comes with guilt, help that comes with submission. But you've changed. You still offer, but on your terms. You still give, but not when it costs your dignity. You still care, but you do not kneel. And that confuses people. They are used to your old version, the one who bent to keep them comfortable, the one who said yes even when it hurt, the one who smiled through mistreatment just to avoid conflict. That version is gone. What remains now is not bitterness, but precision. You choose when to give. You choose who is worth it. You walk into a room with calm authority, and they feel it. They know they cannot pull the same tricks. They know your energy is no longer free. You don't demand attention, you command it. Without begging, without pleading, without lowering yourself to be understood. This is the new form of power, offering value without dependence. They cannot control you through shame anymore. They cannot reward you with scraps of affection, hoping you'll do tricks for more. You've made peace with being misunderstood. You've made peace with walking alone. And in doing so, you've become rare, untouchable. People think power is loud. They think it shows up in force. But Machiavelli knew true power is subtle. It is the man who does not explain himself. The woman who helps others but never begs to be chosen. The presence that can walk away without slamming the door. Because that kind of presence is terrifying. It means you are here by choice, not need. It means your love is a gift, not a transaction. It means your support is strength, not servitude. And for those who only knew how to control the desperate, you are now unreadable. They do not know how to earn from you, how to bait you, how to guilt you, because the leash is gone. You took it off when you stopped needing their approval. You are still kind, but you are not compliant. You are still generous, but you are not naive. And from this point forward, everything you give is pure, not because you owe it, but because you chose it. Machiavelli would not just respect that, he would call it the most dangerous form of power, reward without obedience, presence without permission, and peace without apology. There comes a final moment, quiet, unceremonious, when you realize you are no longer performing, no longer shrinking, no longer filtering your worth through the eyes of others. You are not angry. You are not proving a point. You have simply outgrown the need to be soft in rooms that demand your silence. This is the moment Machiavelli would call the turning of power, when you stop being ruled and begin to rule not others, but yourself. You are no longer the nice one. You are not cruel. You are not cold, but you are precise. You speak less, but everything you say lands. You show up less, but your absence is louder than your old obedience ever was. The people who once expected your submission now meet your silence. The ones who pulled your strings now find they're holding air, because you have finally become untouchable, not in status, but in spirit. Untouchable because no one owns your attention anymore. Untouchable because your boundaries are no longer explained, they are enforced. Untouchable because you do not seek apology, closure, or validation. You've stopped looking back. You've stopped editing yourself in real time to comfort people who never saw the full picture anyway. They called it kindness when you kept giving. They called it grace when you kept tolerating. But they mistook your silence for weakness. And now they see that silence was restraint. That kindness was discipline. That your absence is not a wound. It is a consequence. Machiavelli warned that the world is not run by justice. It is run by perception. And perception is shaped by how you move when you no longer need to be liked. You no longer chase peace, you are peace. You no longer chase power, you are power. Not because you dominate, but because you decide who gets your time, who gets your energy, who gets to be close. And for the first time, your life feels like your own. Not borrowed, not managed, not negotiated. Yours. People will notice. They already have. They will say you're distant, different, difficult. Let them. What they're really saying is, you're no longer predictable. You're no longer available for their games. You are no longer willing to trade your peace for their comfort, and that is terrifying to people who only knew how to love you when you were breakable. So let them talk. Let them remember the version of you that once bent and bled and begged. That version is buried now. In its place stands someone Machiavelli would have feared and admired. Someone not ruled by love, not ruled by hate, but ruled by choice. And when you live by choice, not performance, you become something rare, something final. You become untouchable, and the world, whether it admits it or not, will never see you the same way again. If this opened your eyes even just a little, share it. Let the ones who always demanded your silence hear your new voice. And if you're done being nice, done being predictable, done being used, subscribe for more dark truths and brutal clarity. This is dark blue psychology, where power isn't loud, it's quiet, it's calculated, it's yours.